I don't feel comfortable and safe where this is going. And welcome to the Down in Front podcast, the official podcast of downinfrontpodcast.com. My name is Warren, and I will be your host this evening. If this is your first time checking into our podcast, thanks so much for joining. What we do here is we drink a bunch of beverages, and we review some movies, some TV shows, and just have a good time. We kind of go around the horn and kind of talk about what we've been drinking, what we've been watching, and we kind of do a bit of a recognition of sending us sips before we get into our full review. For tonight, we actually going to be talking about Bohemian Rhapsody from director with an asterisk, Bryan Singer, because we know he didn't finish directing this movie. Starring Rami Malek, Lucy Boynton, and a bunch of other people in this actual film. So I'm going to toss it over to one of my favorite people that I've ever seen, the mouth of the South, Mr. Brylan. Brylan, what's going on, man? What you been drinking and what you been watching?
Oh, hey, that's me. How's it going tonight? What I'm drinking right now is the last of my Woodford Reserve that I've had for about 5 months, just because I haven't drank that much. But I'm taking care of it tonight. What I've been watching recently is a small TV show about a group of superpowered individuals that are outcasted and have to band together to save the world from impending doom, which is called DC's Titans on the DC Universe app. I've watched the first 4 episodes of it, and it didn't really have a good, flattering trailer when it was first shown at Comic-Con. A lot of people got hung up on the phrase "fuck Batman" because of it. But the first episode, I would say, was very meh, but 2, 3, and 4 are really cool, and they're done really well. This is like CW Dark. It's like if they took the production stylings of Gotham, but had the creative minds behind CW, which it does. Greg Berlanti's running the show, along with Jeff Johns, who's writing most of it. And they're able to bring in some unique takes on some well-known characters like Dick Grayson and Raven and Starfire and Beast Boy. But what's much cooler is the side characters they've introduced so far. Like, they've done like almost perfect Hawk and Dove in this series, and also Doom Patrol. So it is amazing to see these other characters be brought into real life. I still think like this type of show and CW shows as a whole, they're entertaining. They're definitely different approach to the comic book genre than what the Netflix series have done with Marvel's shows. But I still enjoy them, and I'm actually enjoying watching this show. So I'm going to stick through it for the rest of the season, see how it ends up.
And is that app free?
That app is free for the first 7 days, and then you got to pay $7.99 a month.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Well, Brylan, it's always great to see your face and hear your voice. So thanks for joining in tonight.
Thank you.
I'm going to toss it over to my best friend that we hang out. We hang out often. I swear that we're friends. I'm sure of it. It says it on Facebook. Mr. Mocha. Mocha, how's it going, man? What you been sipping and what you been watching?
Hey, yo.
No.
What's up, everybody?
Hey, yo.
Very glad. Oh, that's Brian with the callback. Thank you very much. So happy to be here tonight, everybody. Tonight I'm sipping on a delightful little beverage from my local craft brewer. I don't know. It's called yeah, I'm coming from the bodega. But it's called Rice Against the Machine. It is by Mikkeller Brewing Company in San Diego. It is a hoppy lager brewed with jasmine rice and Idaho 7 hops. I was trying to stay on theme for tonight's show, and this was the closest thing to a musically related beer I could find. But also it kind of goes in line with Freddie Mercury and his bucking against the trend with everything he did. So I'm totally down with it. As for what I've been watching lately, I recently completed my run through of season 2 of Castlevania. And let me tell you, this show was dope. For anyone who doesn't know or isn't familiar, Castlevania is a video game series of which last year Netflix put out a 4-episode miniseries. It was originally supposed to be a movie that got passed along and fell into development hell until Netflix picked it up and chopped it up into 4. It was successful, so they did a full season this time around, and it was fantastic. They followed through with the story, brought it to a logical conclusion. But for a show that's about a vampire hunter and his half vampire buddy and his magician girlfriend walking around and killing demons, it was surprisingly thoughtful in terms of its dialogue, really natural and fun dialogue between these characters. And it took a really serious approach to the idea of who Dracula was. He wasn't just some menacing endgame final boss character. He had like a legitimate motivation for his actions and a whole lot of pathos to his character. So it was refreshing. And on top of all that, the animation was absolutely astounding. So if you're in the mood for a pretty quick watch that is chock full of great animation and cool characters, definitely check out Castlevania on Netflix.
I've been hearing so much about that actual show. I haven't had a chance to kind of check it out, but I feel like Netflix is doing a lot of good stuff, especially this year. I know we talked about it last year, and a lot of our reviews have been from Netflix. So good on you. Good on you, Netflix.
Yeah.
I'm going to toss it to my other very best friend, even more than Mocha. We went to high school together, and I actually taught him how to play the guitar. I have the shredder, Mr. Blewett. Blewett, what's going on, man? What you been sipping and what you been watching?
So what I've been sipping this week is a recent edition. It is the White Walker by Johnny Walker. And yeah, it's out, and it's the only thing that I have left in my cabinet, so I figured might as well sip on it. It's pretty solid.
Is that sponsored by George R.R. Martin?
Yeah. Oh yeah, it's it like when you freeze it, it changes from like the normal thing to, yeah, it's really cool. It's a good scotch. I don't know scotch well enough to like actually enjoy it, and I think it's because it's not winter, I don't think it's the most appropriate for this podcast. But like I said, I'm going out of town, and yeah, I needed something to sip on. As far as what I've been watching, I stayed awake until 3 a.m. on Halloween night watching Haunting of Hill House, and then pestered everyone in the group chat to actually do a podcast on it that we just haven't had the time. I will say this, it's phenomenal. It really goes well from like I felt like it went well from like a scary, type film or type story to like more of a psychological thriller. And they did it really well.
Yeah, I'm super bummed because we really wanted to have a separate section on that on Tuesday, but looks like Halloween was on a Wednesday. So thanks for that, Blewett. I was excited though. I did binge that also. I binged it on Monday, I think, and I had like maybe 5 or 6 episodes in that one day. So I'm super pumped to actually talk about it. Kind of opened up a little bit more. I really did enjoy one of those episodes that kind of give you a bit of a breakdown of exactly what's happening, and it's kind of like a bit of a mind fuck. So it was great.
Yeah, we'll just talk about it next year for our Halloween episode.
I don't see anything wrong with that.
I will probably watch it by then.
I think everybody should definitely check this show out also because, again, another Netflix, but this one came on really strong, and I was really digging it throughout the entire show. I even got kind of creeped out. I was kind of afraid to go to sleep for a while.
That's cool.
Oh, yeah. Dealing with that one.
And I am currently sipping on some Apothic Red, the standard. So nothing fancy, nothing crazy. So hopefully we can kind of get through this bottle. And again, I'm also staying with Netflix. So it looks like Castlevania, Haunting of Hill House, and Chilling Adventures of Sabrina. Has anybody take a look at the show yet?
No.
I heard it's really
I haven't
good.
had the chance. Yeah, I haven't had the chance to watch it yet, but I'm looking forward to seeing it.
So I am not a huge fan by any means of Sabrina the Teenage Witch kind of storylines, but I think as I was going to finish Haunting of Hill House, this popped up, and I'm also doing a rewatch, as I said, of Mad Men. And so I'm like, oh, that's Sally Draper. Oh, that's cool. It's nice to kind of see her in something. And it's nice to actually see her outside of that character of Sally Draper and kind of step into a different sort of character entirely. So I think the story is really interesting. They definitely kind of modernized it and made it they're just kind of like explaining things from the ground up. So it's another like not coming of age, but it's another sort of beginning story. I know there's a better word for that.
Origin.
There you go. So it's another like kind of origin story, but I think it's definitely interesting. It's definitely kind of going a lot of different routes, and I'm pretty pumped about. So definitely go check that out. I think I'm at episode 3 right now. They're usually about an hour. So I'm at episode 3. I'm digging it. I'm hoping that it kind of gets a little bit better, a little bit more action, but they definitely have been ramping up some stuff. And they do this really weird kind of view that it kind of like zooms out and it almost puts like a fish lens on the camera. So it's a little odd. I'm curious to see how everybody thinks about that. So now, before we get into our spoiler section, what I'm going to be doing is introducing a new segment that we have called Send a Sip, where we're going to be giving recognitions and almost kind of shout outs and send everybody a drink to say, and thank you so much for being and caring for us. So I'm going to toss it over to Mr. Mouth of the South. And Rylan, who you got to send a sip for?
Yeah, so I'm going to send a sip out to Wyatt Ching. If you don't know who he is, he's director of Diablo Immortal, a new game that was announced at BlizzCon over the weekend. He's been through a lot of probably unnecessary criticism directed towards a recently announced unfinished project that he actually handled very well. I was able to get the BlizzCon viewers pass to watch all the panels and everything, and he made statements and everything, and I don't think he needs to go beyond that. So, bully to you, Wyatt Chang, for standing your ground, keeping it as a professional, unlike people that are running a crybaby tirade all over the internet over this announcement. I will send a sip right over to you, and I'll talk a little bit more about that on Wicked Good Gaming's Not Another Gaming podcast this week, where we will go more in depth in BlizzCon.
Wow, shameless plug, bro.
Brian, if you want to have a conversation about that with me afterwards, that'd be great, because I would love to vent about why this is a perfect reason why fucking nerds shouldn't be let out of the basement to attend things like BlizzCon. I'm so fucking embarrassed for our kind.
Yeah, don't worry. I'm preparing a statement for when I record on Wicked Good Gaming.
That's so good. I'm so excited about that. Blewett, what you got for me?
I'm going to send a sip to Barack Obama, just so that we could put him in our mentions when we release the
Hashtag Barack Obama.
At Barack Obama.
Hashtag please come
Send
back.
a sip to Barrio.
Hey-o. No. Just thinking about him today. Just thinking.
For those of you listening in the future, today is Election Day in the U.S. So we've all got it. We've all got you on our minds.
Yes. I haven't heard of Barrio before, but I'm gonna probably now call him Barrio from now on.
Yeah, when you talk to him personally.
Yeah, for sure. I'm gonna see him next week. I'm excited. Mocha, what you got for me?
Yeah, I want to send a sip out to our mutual buddy Andrew Ong, aka Ayo, out in Boston. I don't know if he listens. I don't think he listens, but today, as we mentioned, is Election Day. And of all the people I know, he is the only person who not only talked about just being interested in the politics of this election in general, but also went out canvassing and spent a lot of time phone banking and spent a lot of time berating me for not spending time phone banking. And he basically walked the walk when a lot of people are just all talk these days. So a big shout out to you, AO, for being a little bit more than just woke. The sip's for you.
Good stuff. And I'm going to end off in sending a sip to everybody who voted today.
Oh, thank you.
That was me sipping. Thanks for doing that. I think it's very important. And I know that a lot of people kind of have choices and they choose to. And I know there's a lot of people that I know personally that doesn't have the ability to vote. So that's even more impactful when people have the ability and kind of actually go through with it. So thanks so much for everybody for there. That is pretty awesome. So good on you. Thank you for that.
Yeah. If you're listening and you are in a relationship with somebody who didn't vote, cut them off sexually. No vote, no throat. 2018.
So with that, we are going to take a break and get into our spoiler section. So if you have not seen Bohemian Rhapsody, we will suggest you pause the actual recording, go watch the movie, pick it back up here, and we will see you soon for a full spoiler section of Bohemian Rhapsody. we are the Down in Front podcast. Thanks everybody for kind of tuning in. We are in our spoiler section. So we are talking about spoilers for Bohemian Rhapsody. We're going to be going ahead and reviewing the actual movie. So we broke it up into a couple different sections. As always, we'll be talking about the acting, the character. We'll talk a bit about like the depiction of sexuality in this actual movie. We're then going to go into, the use of music, sort of lip syncing, sort of isolated vocals, or how they use that in the actual film itself. And then as we end it off, we're actually going to be talking about our favorite Queen song and any other experiences that come with that. So before we do that, I'm going to read the IMDb, and then I'm going to toss it over to Brylan to start talking about some of your acting, character, and depictions of sexuality. So it says, a chronicle of the years leading up to Queen's legendary appearance at Live Aid 1985 concert, directed by Bryan Singer, which I still don't, we still have like some bunny ears on that one, so definitely some air quotes, because I don't think he's actually kind of finished the actual movie, and it seems to be he was pretty terrible at everything.
He didn't even get close.
No, well, I mean, he got enough to give him directing credit. So
yeah, but that was like, I think he did principal photography, and then he disappeared for like 2 months, and no one heard from him, and they brought the other guy in.
He was staying in his trailer, not going to the set, and that's where they found him.
Do you know who the other guy is? Because I've been trying to find who is this person that stepped in to complete the actual.
He was a director considered before Bryan Singer. His last name's Fletcher.
Yeah, I thought it was I was gonna say Fletcher Munson, but that's something completely different.
All right, we'll see if we can kind of put that work in. So, Brylan, what you got for me?
So when talking about this movie, I think it's only fair to start with Rami Malek's performance. So Rami Malek, star of Mr. Robot, one of the worst TV shows to come out in the last 5 years. I thought he was a terrible actor in that series. Any other bit part I've seen him in, I'm just like annoyed by his presence. But damn, the makeup team on this movie do an incredible job making sure that he just looks the part, from like the sunken cheeks to the overgrown incisors in his face, and having to work around that prosthetic, as well as just convey the mannerisms of Freddie, but also kind of capture Freddie's attitude and also what Freddie stood for in terms of just like being a person regardless of his sexuality or just how to live life, but also being able to manage like the sadder, more lonely moments of Freddie's life. Rami hits it out of the park for it. I'm glad that they didn't tell him to sing like Freddie Mercury. That's like an impossible task on its own. But even the moments where he's just like auditioning for Smile, or they're just messing around in the studio and starting to record and everything, he definitely shows that he has some type of vocal range that can kind of blend into what Freddie Mercury is. But yeah, he wouldn't be able to do the actual performance itself.
One quick note, they actually did 3 voices. They did a little bit of Rami Malek. They did a little bit of Freddie Mercury, which is kind of cool. And then they brought in a professional singer to do most of it. So like anything that wasn't synced to music was, or like the original recordings was mostly just all this third party. I forget his name. I was reading about it the other day.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, and it's good that they did that just to keep it cohesive, because there's parts that Rami just shines, especially when it comes to more of the quieter moments. Like I love the scene where they're sitting on at the farm, and he's just starting to write lyrics down, which eventually becomes I believe it's "You're My Best Friend," and the way he's just behaving while he writes something down, and he knows that it's going to be good. It speaks volumes to that character. Also, like when him and Mary have their first phone call after they've separated and moved out, it's such an awkward but also very bittersweet moment, because like he truly loves Mary, but because of who he is, they can't be together. And there's that sadness to it, but there's that hope that he always has with everything he approaches, that like we're gonna make it work out somehow, some way, even if it starts tearing us apart for any reason. So his optimism was always shining through, even in the darkest moments. And I think One of my favorite moments also is when he gets the diagnosis that he has HIV, and he's walking out, and there's a another patient that's definitely far more advanced with AIDS, and he just does the AO call back to him, and Freddie just turns around, just gives that very weak, very mortal AO back to him. I thought that was very beautiful, but at the same time, just all the feelings just rush through in that scene like that.
Yeah. Yeah, that was. I really enjoyed that part of it a lot. That was very sad, but I'm glad that they at least put some sort of these small like tidbits of like there's something deeper happening. There's something deeper kind of going on, and how their music that they've created already, right? Because this is near the end of the movie. How their music has already kind of inspired and created so much passion for other people that it's not just a band, right? And they mentioned this also. It's not just a band. It's not just music. Like it definitely means a lot more. So
Well,
pretty cool.
I'll remark in on that too. Like, I think so. They made the remark on how most pop songs aren't 6 minutes plus long. You know, they're tight 3 minutes, and then you're off to the next one. And I think it really drives through the point that Queen was like huge before they were huge. Like they never had that quiet moment of like, hey, let's like try and make it. It's like, no, Freddie was coming out in the most flamboyant vest you've ever seen to meet some local guy who randomly heard their demo tape from SoundCloud and was like gonna check him out a little bit.
Yeah, they definitely had a meteoric rise to fame almost immediately after their first album.
That's a good word.
It's crazy.
Also, Brown, and along with the prosthetics, with the face and the makeup, they also worked with a movement coach. And I thought Rami Malek's, that's a Freudian slip. His movements were so spot on. Like I had a Queen DVD growing up, of a couple of performances, which was hilarious because Freddie Mercury just gets more and more naked the more the show goes on. He like starts off in like full things with like a little vest over the top, and then he ends and I'm pretty sure just tighty whities and like boots, and that's it. And it's the phenomenal. But yeah, so like, you know, I used to burn that thing in, and you know, you have a little nighttime and pop on some Queen, and he has such a definitive way of moving around the stage that maybe like someone like Mick Jagger comes to mind of like someone who has that definitive stage presence, which isn't necessarily like, yeah, it's like there's awe-inspiring performers. There's like someone like Robert Plant, you know, easy early 70s rock and roll guy. Like he was awe-inspiring on stage, but he didn't move like that. He didn't have like that signature move. And Freddie Mercury had so many, and to try and incorporate all of them into and make it look natural was freaking phenomenal.
Yeah, absolutely. I also think like a lot of the side actors, supporting cast, they did a good job too. Like even though we don't get as much time with them as we do with Freddie, everybody that played Brian May or Roger Taylor or John Deacon, they actually had their moments in this movie, and I'm glad they did. I like that we see that whenever they're going through the creative process of making a record, especially like that first record, it's always played like to be kind of humoristic, that it's a clash of all these different personalities, just thinking up whatever wacky shit will actually work and see if it works, like throwing pennies on a snare top, or dousing it with beer, or just playing on any different surface just to make a different sound happen. And part of me kind of hopes that was actually kind of factual, that they were just like, here's $300, we only got a few hours, let's throw everything at the books and see what happens. And it was really cool to see, like, even though Freddie kind of like drove the creative like structure around what an album would sound like, that everybody had their input, or everybody had an idea that they wanted to actually bring, or they just played off one another to make a compromised idea that actually works. Like even though Brian May gets I'm in love with my car on that album, I mean, there's still room for Bohemian Rhapsody at the same time. And I think it was always really cool just to see, like, when they're talking about doing "We Will Rock You," Brian May is just like kind of figuring like, how do we actually incorporate fans into our music? And that John Deacon wants to do a disco song. Everybody's like, why disco? That's nuts. And he starts playing the bass line. Everybody's like, that could be sick. Let's play off of that. I always liked all those moments because it was just fun to see them mess around, whether they were in good attitudes or bad attitudes. That they were able to bring some realism to wacky moments as well, and you enjoyed both at the same time.
I will say this, that it was really cool. So my band, we kind of have a similar thing. Like, bands don't really work unless people are giving honest feedback. Oh yeah, we're the next Queen. Just Maya News.
Oh, okay, cool.
Queen's coming. Queen. That works the other way. Queen, we're coming for Maya News. But where, like, so my buddy who plays bass and sings, he writes a lion's share of the skeleton tracks. And then I fill in all the other gaps and then tell him which parts suck and he needs to rewrite or just write them myself. And so it's kind of like cool seeing that they're not following around Freddie Mercury like some genius and they're groveling and like, oh no, keep us with you. Like Maroon 5. You know, Adam Levine could do whatever the hell he wants. I'm not saying Adam Levine and Freddie Mercury are anywhere near each other in skill set, but Adam Levine is what makes Maroon 5 tick, and if that dude dropped out of it, they would be the no ones. Whereas Queen, like, all the other guys had legitimate talent. Like, Brian May is a phenomenal guitar player. They could all sing, you know, like, not saying they'd be the same band, but having someone who, not having Freddie, the band still probably works in some capacity. Obviously not Queen, but in some capacity. And it was really nice that they threw that in there and didn't make it just like Freddie wrote every single thing like frickin' Pete Townsend did in The Who. Roger Daltrey did not write a single lyric, which blows my frickin' mind. Like, that's unbelievable.
Pete Townsend's literal genius.
Yeah, oh yeah. He's written every single guitar, bass, and I think Keith Moon was too drunk to listen to, like, you know, Townsend's drum lines, so he just kind of did his own thing, but, like... Yeah, it wasn't like that.
Even Roger Taylor, the drummer for Queen, he released 2 albums in the 80s when they were taking a break and everything. So, I mean, everybody in that band is mad talented in some way. And if it's not music, they are set up for being very talented in some field, whether it's astrophysics or electrical engineering. They all got some, like, wow, you're just like super educated and just a smart dude that likes to play music, and that's awesome. Also thought I actually appreciated Lucy Boynton throughout this movie as Mary. I thought her moments were always really done very well, and also it was interesting to see because this relationship is very unique relationship that even though at one time they wanted to get married, and I don't know if they officially ever got married in real life or they were just common law, but I mean, it was Freddie's best friend in his whole life. They knew, I mean, the writing was on the wall that, yeah, he wasn't going to be able to be with her in any traditional marriage sense at all. But they became neighbors. They still stayed in touch with one another. And it was interesting to see how that actual friendship grew, because usually if that happens, I mean, usually the Hollywood like portrayal of something like that is they go their separate ways, and you see, and one of them's either villainized and becomes out of the picture, or becomes the villain of that story, or it becomes like this huge like hurdle that, or obstacle that's been lifted off of the other person that's been quote unquote oppressed. Where here you have 2 individuals that are on equal grounds and they're just don't know what to do about it. It's actually handled very human, very real way, which I appreciated.
Yeah, I like the fact that it wasn't, as clean, or it wasn't something as easy. Like, it looks like even every step of the way in the movies that each and every scene, there was always something different, and it was growing and ticking back and forth. And exactly how you said, is a very fluid but very disjointed at the same time. But it kind of worked at certain points, and in certain sections and certain scenes, Freddie was holding back, and then later on, you can clearly tell that Mary was holding back because they were just trying to be there for each other at like difficult points in their lives. But I think the simplicity of when we first see Mary, and she tells him to go to, he said, "I like your jacket," which was a women's jacket, right? And she tells him to go where she got it from with Biba, and he went over there, and their interactions just with the fact that he's trying on and putting on women's clothing and let Mary kind of put makeup on his face, and how there was just no issue with that. I thoroughly enjoyed the fact that it wasn't like a big deal, in the fact that it was just something that she just accepted for him for who he is right off the bat. Also was very refreshing, and it was just nice to see.
I will say this.
Well, I was going to say that I appreciate that from Mary's character, but I felt like a lot of the movie, and we can go further into this later on when we go deeper into the sexuality of the movie, but I feel like a lot of this movie went out of its way to like show everything just being okay about Freddie Mercury's expression of sexuality and the people around him. And I feel like in the 70s and 80s, especially in the UK, where homosexuality had only just been decriminalized a few years before Queen got together, that it wouldn't have been as honky-dory in its actual experiences of interactions with some people. And I felt like it was a little too easy on what that could have been like for him or the other people in his entourage at that time.
Two things. I mean, one, has anyone looked up when he came out? Like, was he already like a famous rock star? Because my assumption is his.
So, Freddie Mercury actually never officially made a statement about his sexuality.
Yeah, because to me, from what I read, Freddie Mercury was someone that just had no closet. You just accept him for who he is.
I mean, the public media would like question him and pester him about it, much like we saw in the film. But he never actually made an official statement. He had his he lived with his lover. Jim Hutton for plenty of years near going into the end of his life, but there was never an actual statement about it until posthumously. Yeah, even though it was one of those things where, like, as Brian mentioned, he was Freddie Mercury everywhere he went, and he kind of like let his freak flag fly, even though he didn't go on the record of saying, "I am XYZ."
Because I mean, I genuinely don't know. Like, I wonder if he was treated any differently, if he was quote unquote came out later when he was already a big rock star. It would have kind of been interested to see that play out. I mean, I don't know, if someone's a multi-millionaire leading the biggest rock band on the planet, they're probably not getting pushed in lockers like if they were in high school. Came out in high school and had to deal with that then. The way the movie framed it made it seem like he really came into his own when he had a little bit of momentum behind him. And maybe didn't have to deal with that sort of cultural backlash.
Yeah, I mean, being an elevated rock star definitely gets you some protections, especially when you're a global rock star. But I mean, from everything I've read about Freddie's life, I mean, he just seemed like the person where that was unnecessary to make a big deal about. Like, this is a guy that publicly announced he has AIDS the day before he died, and so it wasn't because, like they say in the movie, he didn't want to be like the poster boy for AIDS treatment or anything. He wanted to live his life the way on his own terms, and that's the type of person he was.
Yeah, so an interesting thing about that, Brian, as the whole not even talking about his HIV status, is that it's a difficult thing to do with Freddie Mercury's story in general, is tell exactly XYZ or like ABC, these are the things that happened, because he was so quiet and reserved about the details of his personal life up until the day he died. And we can look at the notion of him announcing his having contracted HIV so late into his progression with it as a situation where he was like, oh, well, like, people don't need to know about my life. I'm Freddie Mercury. I'll do whatever, and I'll just say it now because it's far enough along. But you can also look at it as the fact that the 80s was a terrible time regarding health and health awareness in the general public. The AIDS crisis was a legitimate crisis. There wasn't really an idea of how to stop it. It was, as I mentioned, like off camera earlier, it was referred by a lot of people colloquially as gay cancer. and one of those things that just identified you as a gay person, even if you weren't back in the day. And so, there's also that question of, well, maybe he just didn't want to discuss his HIV because, again, that's another clear signal to people that he is a gay man or a bisexual man or a sexually fluid man, in a situation where he was trying to avoid having that conversation with the public or with the media in general. But it's difficult to actually say for sure it was either A or B because he was such a reclusive and a person with his own personal details.
Yeah.
One last thing about his sexuality. I was so afraid they were going to straight wash him. The first trailer that came out had it mostly him and Mary. And then they spent the first half hour of just pretty much them two together. And I was like, oh no, what are they are they just are they just going to be a loving couple for the rest of the movie? Because historically speaking, I think he left all of his money to her and the cats.
Yeah.
So
his estate, the cats, everything.
It's the royalties.
She was a huge part of his life, and they could easily have just made her the primary love interest the entire film. And so I'm glad that they kind of went there. I think Mocha, you had something on Jim. I'll let you explore that because I completely agree with you on it.
That he looks too much like Rob Delaney.
Oh, he looks so much like Rob Delaney. For a while, I really thought it was him. I thought it was what's his name from Peter from Deadpool 2.
Yep.
Yeah, the situation with Jim Hutton's character is interesting because, obviously this movie took some liberties with the actual events that happened in Freddie Mercury's life. His story about his relationship with Jim Hutton, as far as we're aware, as far as I was able to find out doing some research on this, is that, he met Jim Hutton in a bar, at a nightclub, and they hit it off, but weren't able to do anything about it. And then a year and a half later, they crossed paths again, and then it blossomed into this really exciting relationship for him. Jim went on to be his hairdresser, and they stayed together for the rest of their life. But in this movie, it felt odd because it felt almost like Jim Hutton's character was really just there as a way for Freddie Mercury's character to have a sexual redemption at the end. In this film, things don't really start going badly for Freddie Mercury's character until he comes out to his then fiance, and I got the impression watching this film that his sexuality was directly tied to the shittiness of his life. The gayer he got, the worse his life got, and look at how he lets life spiral out of control. The more gay guys he surrounds himself with, and the more he dives into that culture. But here's Jim at the end, who is the one thing that who is an example of what a lot of people who are miseducated about gay culture, gay people, think that they don't see in the gay community, right? A lot of ignorant people will think, oh, gay men are just super promiscuous and are super into drugs and sex and hedonistic. And Jim was the opposite of that. He was this really wholesome character, and he was just there for Freddie Mercury to get to at the end as the checkpoint to say, hey, I've turned my life around and I'm not that kind of gay anymore. Now I'm and everything will be better because of it. And so it just kind of sat weirdly for me. And it's got to be weird, I feel like, for the people who knew Jim too, because it seems like everything I've come to understand about them, he was way more than that. They were, they had a really meaningful relationship that went on for years until his last days.
Yeah, it's interesting to see how they handled the other characters' reactions to Freddie's sexuality. For example, the band, they're cool with Freddie as a person or anything, but when Freddie invites them to one of his parties, they start to get uncomfortable because, granted, it's three straight guys with their wives and everything in this cavalcade of gay opulence that, they like they say, it's hey, it's just not our scene. It's we could sit here and have drinks, but if you're going to ask us to partake in anything, sorry, that's not going to happen. We still love you, Freddie.
I took that less as a gay thing.
Yeah, it's a difference in lifestyles, regardless if it's gay, straight, or not.
Yeah,
regardless
I thought
if it's
it was
sexuality
just
driven.
Decadence of the 80s rather than
what's really cool about that scene though is that they don't treat the band as homophobes or anything about it. And I appreciate that it is that this is just one part of Freddie that we will never really understand. We'll just accept you for who you are, and if you want to do this, that's fine. Just don't expect us to be there with you, type of thing. And I think is good. They kept that pretty real.
So I really quick, I appreciate that little like interaction that you two just had there, Blue and Brylan, because like Blue, you saying that it wasn't because it was like they were cool with him being gay, and Brylan saying, well, it wasn't about him being gay, it was about the lifestyle that he was leading. Yes, that's absolutely true, but I don't think that comes off in the movie. I think it comes off as like as soon as he starts surrounding himself by like a whole bunch of like party crazy queers, he starts ostracizing the people from him, and his life starts that downward spiral. So I think that's an interesting at least communication between you two, because that highlights the like that sort of discordance that I felt watching it myself.
I definitely interpret it differently than from what I've read of most reviews of it. And I also think it's really interesting how they handle his manager. What was his name? Peter or Paul?
Paul.
Did he actually do that stuff? We don't know. And I'm pretty sure this is a biopic you could definitely get out the fact book and tear it to shreds. But it was interesting to see, like, I think they should have had some scenes where have Freddie like just make his own choices to go to like a leather bar or something, that he's not with Peter or anybody. He just needs kind of like Freddie time, and Freddie needs to let his freak flag fly, because that's who Freddie was. He was promiscuous. He did bang anything that moves, regardless of sex, from what I've read. And I think it is a little unfair that they kind of paint like this negative force in his life, kind of pushing him, that it does come off a little bit as him pushing him towards this lifestyle, even though we do see Freddie enjoying parts of it, regardless if it's this guy that has negative intent that wants Freddie for his own or anything.
I thought it was also strange that kind of going on that Brylan, when we see him drinking, right? And we see Freddie like throughout the movie kind of drinking, and there was no sort of issues. But then when Paul sort of came into the picture, that's when the heavy drugs came in. That's when that's when everything, especially what Mocha was talking about, of the majority of the time that he's surrounding himself, that's when I felt like it was like the bad part, quote unquote bad part of the movie, which is kind of a bummer, because it just so happened, and much like that article that you sent me, it just so happened to say that the villain of this movie is another homosexual character, which is not really fair to say.
Yeah.
So two things. First of all, Paul definitely did all that crap. I haven't done any research, but it was the 80s, and he was a person in some sort of position of power. Like, and there was drugs. Like, there's no way in my mind he didn't take advantage of Freddie. Like none. The second part is
one thing I can confirm is that at the very least, Paul did have that tell-all moment after they're falling out. It was done in an interview in a magazine, not on TV, but he did, go to the media and say, "Hey, this is all the dirt I have on Freddie Mercury. Take it all."
That would be wicked funny if they did it in a magazine. On screen, and they just had like the article scroll by like Star Wars style, and you just had to read it. The second thing is, Mocha, that party scene, that reminded me of another 80s movement. Caroline has gotten me into this whole like real life murder thing. Friend of the show, of course. And so one of the recent like white chick podcasts that she's been listening to, they did a full episode on the Club Kids, which was a like mid to late 80s New York City like group. And so this is how my life is now. I've seen like 6 documentaries about this thing and listened to like 14 podcasts. And so seeing a lot of that, to me, the villain of those scenes isn't the queer folk hanging around, because I'll draw the parallel to the Club Kids, and this is why I didn't see like them surrounded by like queer people and then the band kind of like didn't enjoy it. But it's the drugs that are involved in that. Like they make the point for the Club Kids that like they were just these zany people that were hanging out doing fun stuff and you wanted to be around. And then they all started doing heroin. and then they started murdering each other, or at least the one guy did. And so you know, it was one of those things that, like, for me watching that scene, all I could think of was these documentaries, and how, like, they all start off as, like, well-intentioned, reasonable human beings that are just living full expression of their lives. And then, fun fact, cocaine apparently makes you party longer. And so, well, hey, I want to express myself for longer. I'm going to shove my nose full of this stuff. And then you become, like, that shell of a human being that you experience. And so for me, that scene was pretty well done, of, like, not like gay folks are bad and the band just doesn't want to be around this queeritude, but, like, it's something that, like, it shows the descent into, he's becoming fundamentally a different person due to outside influences, not his own brain chemistry.
So, and this like, it's a callback to what I was saying earlier. I completely agree. Like, the issue in those scenes were the elements that he was putting himself into via partying and drugs and all this stuff. But the only people who do hard drugs in this movie are the queers. The only people who have these wild parties are the gays. And like, outside of those areas, every time he's around straight people, everything is perfectly fine. No one's doing anything more than having a beer. And
the
it was
British,
just
they're
like,
pretty reserved.
To be fair,
Yeah,
gay
I
folk
also,
do
like,
know how
picked
to
up on
party.
that too. I mean, I can definitely agree with you, Mocha. I definitely, I think the second time that I watched it, and I was watching it for other stuff, I was definitely getting more of those vibes of, this is, I'm curious. I feel like the people, like the showrunners in the movie, the people who created this movie, had one take of what they wanted to try to say, but they maybe didn't quite know how some of these things would go off to the to the what
Keep on going. Nothing.
no.
Just
This is not entirely sure. Like, whatever they kind of put into this movie, they wanted to show his life, but all you had to do is kind of show a couple other scenes of people that were straight that were actually there, whereas everybody that was in his party was, even the point where I thought was kind of a little kind of frustrating was when there was a song that was saying "Another One Bites the Dust," and that was the first time in this movie that we heard that song. And you see Freddie, there was, like, no audio. He's, like, walking through this club that people, like, grinding on each other. It looks like it's clearly, like, some sort of, like, sort of club that's exclusive, because it was only men that were there in this actual club, and clearly that was all that he wanted to do. And I'm like, but it didn't have to be. I was curious to see at that point in the movie why they chose to put that song on it, because then later on they were talking about the AIDS virus and everything that was happening too. So I was like, I was just curious to see how they kind of overlaid that song with that particular scene, especially in that time.
So, like, my interpretation of that scene, especially, like, the fact that he was in that seedy dark club with that music, I think the director was trying to tell us that was the moment, like, that was when he got it. And so I think it was very intentional that Another One Bites the Dust was playing while he was in an underground, like, leather sex club. I mean, maybe it wasn't intentional, but that's how it just came off watching it, which, like, left me with a bit of a weird taste given the approach.
So let's talk about the music. Let's talk about the lip syncing, because we had talked about it a bit more of the isolated vocals. Let's talk about the ending sequence, because maybe not everybody didn't like that final show. Who knows? So I'm going to toss it over to Mocha. Let's start with you.
So one of the strong points of this movie, and I don't even know if I want to call it a strong point, but maybe one of the benefits of the subject matter, is the fact that everyone loves Queen. Anyone who's going to see this movie at least has a cursory enjoyment of Queen, and so getting to see them perform and hearing their songs played is going to feel good no matter what. The last performance at Live Aid was really cool in general. Like, it was the high point of the film. It was his return to glory after having, like, sunken low. But for me, as someone who was already a little bit bored with the film in terms of how kind of formulaic it was from start to finish, I felt like it just dragged on and on and on. And it was really cool to see, because a lot of the choreography, the way he moved, the little gestures he made, like the kiss he blew to his mom, like, all of that was, like spot on if you watch the original Live Aid performance on YouTube, and it was super impressive. But also at that point in the story, like I wanted more from Freddie, and instead I just had to like sit and watch almost the entire Live Aid performance with like a really like weirdly CGI with like a CGI audience around him.
Yeah, and the CG Wembley Stadium like pan-ins were kind of just weird.
They did actually build that stadium, so it's funny because they built the stadium. So that was because they tore down that's the old Wembley. In the movie, it was old Wembley. The new Wembley stadium's completely different because they still play football and stuff there. So they had to actually build the old Wembley Stadium as a practical effect. But the thing that I was curious about is they had a practical effect, but they still put CG people in it. And I was like, bitch, no, just go all practical. What are you doing?
I don't think you can get people. Yeah, you can't get 100,000 people to.
Well,
also,
just tell them Beyonce's playing.
Just tell people in London there's a free Queen concert there.
No, so there were actually people there. Like there was a lot of people there. It wasn't everybody, right? But there was a lot of practical effects in this final sequence in this. And I did a little bit of homework too. This was actually the first scene that they shot of the movie, which was weird. So the first thing that they did was this final sequence of the movie, which I thought was very interesting. They want to do it that way. So they did have a lot of practical in there. I was just very confused as to why they chose not just do it all practical. They can get enough people to at least want to be in the movie.
I thought it looked like they only did the stage.
Is really good.
Yeah, it looks like they only did the stage, not the full stadium.
They probably had like 1,000 people, like the front rows.
They did the full stadium.
No way they brought a full. No way.
The panning shots reminded me of the rave scenes in Zion and Matrix 2.
It reminded me like the overpans in Gladiator on the Coliseum.
Yeah. It reminded me of the crowd in like any FIFA game.
Yeah, I mean it wasn't very good, but to kind of go against what you said, Mocha, I think that was of course I'm sure everybody's going to say this, that was one of my favorite sort of moments there, especially because I hadn't quite seen a lot of this stuff. I didn't really know Queen too much. I think the first time that I was introduced to them was in high school because it was our final song, like our senior song, and I'm like, I don't know who Queen is. Okay, cool. But I knew their music, or at least kind of familiar with some of their songs. And it wasn't until I met up with Dylan, friend of the show, he's been on the podcast a bunch, that he started telling me about a lot of their music. Yeah, huge Queen. But he started telling me about a lot of their music, and I was like, okay, cool. Like it still didn't quite like kind of sit with me. And this movie, it didn't, this movie just kind of like put a bit of an exclamation point on it, because at least for me, and why overall I enjoyed the movie, is I just didn't realize how much of an impact that their music and their personas happen to have on everybody. So much so that we're talking about a movement of this band and what they've actually were meant to represent in the 70s. And then basically start in the 70s and kind of throughout, and even things that we're dealing with in society today of people still not having the ability to see another person for who they are, and why do I have to list what my my sex is, or what I like classify as, right? Like why can't I just be Queen isn't something that anybody has. Queen is just Queen, for example, like one of the lines of the movie. So that's why at the end, there was a lot of pan shots of a lot of people, and, they had like, there was a father and son, and it just definitely showed much more of an impact that I just never quite seen before. So it gave me a bit of a different perspective. Even so, the movie started almost where it ended, right? The movie started when they're walking up, but it was curious to know that it started when you just see Freddie walk in. And it's just Freddie. He's jumping around and he's having a good time, and he walks on stage. And that was the beginning of the movie. Then we fast forward all the way at the end before the sequence. And not only do we see Freddie, but we see the entire band behind them. And they're all going up there as a group, which now we know from the weight of the movie that happened with the falling out and coming back, it made a lot more sense. And it made it even more impactful that they now pulled the camera back a little bit to show the entire group. I'm pretty sure it was 2 different shots, but they at least pulled the camera back a little bit and show that it's entire group. So it was a way more harmony there, and all the stuff that was happening with Live Aid, and the fact that we had the scene right before his father, which that was by far my favorite sequence of the movie.
Yeah.
when he talks about doing good deeds.
Good words.
Yeah, good words, good
thoughts.
Good words, good thoughts, good deeds, right? And I actually choked up and like even the second time I saw it with Brylan, I was like, God damn it, I knew it was coming. That's why I enjoyed the final sequence of the movie. It felt like it was a culmination of all these things that we just didn't quite see, and then we get, a better version of we saw on YouTube, because the YouTube version is not the best. So we have a better version of what we saw on YouTube with the actual audios, which is great, right? And it sounds a bit better because the technology is better from the time frame. So I think pulling all that stuff together, it was amazing. That thank God you didn't actually sing, Rami Malek. I'm glad that you just actually kind of put those on there, because I would literally listen to not only that final sort of musical number, but I think one of my other favorite scenes was actually when the credits were rolling and they just had that live show of them singing. I always want to say "Don't Stop, Can't Stop, Don't Stop Me Now." So that was another favorite, because they were just in it, right? They can just clearly kind of sing. You can clearly tell that they were just jamming out. So that's why I thoroughly kind of enjoyed that final sequence.
Yeah, I mean, Queen's music definitely has a universal appeal. Fun fact, Queen was a very powerful global rock band, but also at the same time, they were like kind of mild to moderate success in the US. It was like the big market that, for whatever reason, they weren't able to crack. And Live Aid is actually like that concert that introduces Queen to the US, and we kind of catch up with the rest of the world, which is I always found is fascinating. And that plus Wayne's World coming out. I just love how they take this nice, like, just lighthearted approach to explore like their creative process for the bits, like especially like when they're in the record execs, the EMI execs office. Just to say, like, Mike Myers' cameo in this movie is fucking amazing, and just when they talk about like what their next album is going to be, they don't talk about songs. They talk about concepts. They talk about opera. They talk about disco. They talk about doing synthesizers, and they're like, oh, that's crazy and that's wrong and gross, but like, hey, let's try it out and see what happens. That's Queen. They're going to make art. They're not there to make a rock song. Because that's the type of band they are. I like that the song choice that they had. You could choose 20 other different Queen songs and still have a great movie driven by Queen, which is amazing. Queen, I like that. I mean, I expected them to pick the popular ones, and they definitely did. But they also made room for some lesser known Queen songs. Like, I was happy they had Innuendo in there. That's a song that I love by Queen that not everybody knows about. So it was really cool to see that they gave a little bit of the lesser known songs some.
Blue, what you got?
First of all, before I start, this is an SM7B. It's a broadcast microphone. People use it a lot in radio, but this is also the microphone that was used to record the vocals on Thriller. This microphone is what's called a front address microphone, meaning this is supposed to be pointed at the mouth. The one huge mistake, I'll give them, the music technology, lingo, and all that fun stuff was like pretty spot on. The fact that tape like breaks down over time, and that you can't just hammer away take after take after take on it, and like how they had to like route certain things and just commit to it, was awesome. The technology was good. They put this damn thing against the guitar speaker like this. This is called a side address microphone if it's positioned like this. This isn't it. They got it wrong. You're
such a fucking nerd.
They got it wrong. And it's such an easy... Look at this thing. Just point this at the sound... Whatever makes sound, just point this one at it. Woo! Also, you don't typically record guitars with this thing. So, yeah, it's more of a vocal thing. But, anyways...
Keep them honest.
I poked Caroline, a friend of the show who happened to be at the movie theater with me. I was at the movie theater with. To be fair, it was my mom's birthday, and I took her to go see this movie. Then Caroline, friend of the show, was also there. And I was poking her on the shoulder. I'm like, they got it wrong for like 4 minutes. She's like, I don't care. They're recording Bohemian Rhapsody. Shut up.
She was correct. Don't poke anybody in the movie theater. That's weird.
No, it was strangers. I was there by myself. So a couple things. Speaking to the technology side of things, Brian May has one of those signature setups. Like you think of Jimi Hendrix with a Stratocaster and the Marshall stacks. It's like that's pretty cool. And
the English penny pick.
Yeah, that was awesome. Well, ZZ Top's I forgot May did that too. ZZ Top plays with a peso, which I think is kind of cool. Yeah. But Brian May, he uses an amplifier called a Vox AC-130 or just AC-30. I might just be thinking of that support perk in Call of Duty. And he uses a guitar called the Red Special. And it was
making shit up.
No, I'm not. Dude, he hand built this guitar with his father. And so the fact that they had the Red Special, and so May, what he'd do is he'd keep all these like amplifiers in like a circle, like he has a very, very unique guitar setup, and I freaking love that they went through the detail and showing that, because they could easily have thrown a couple Marshall half stacks behind him and it would have had the exact same same deal on the movie.
And I think John Deacon, the bass player, even built an amp for him too.
Yeah, that would make sense. The other thing is that in that scene recording Bohemian Rhapsody, I loved, May is a phenomenal guitar player. I said this earlier. He is also, he stretches the gap between clinical and emotive. You know, he's not fast enough to be the super shred guys, but I wouldn't say he's bendy, a blues cat. And I loved that scene when talking about the guitar solo, which is saying all right, well, loosen it up a little bit, but not that much. Because he has this weirdly operatic way of, I don't know. This is a stupid point.
It's very melodic.
Yeah, but it's not bendy and bluesy. This is a stupid part. I think only 4 guitar players that are just me that will enjoy. But what was I gonna say? I did love that scene when they came up with "We Will Rock You." Queen. I would say Queen is the Apple of bands. The reason I say that is that they do things not necessarily on the cutting edge, doing a 6-minute long rock song, rock opera. Concept albums were a thing in the 70s. Everyone did them, but what I was saying earlier, they're mostly established bands that had a couple pop records before them. And so here's this upstart band that's just kind of doing it right off the back. Again, the genre of music is already there, but they just came around and did it. You have later on in it when they do Another One Bites the Dust, Kiss did a freaking disco album. You know, everyone tried to do that style of music, but they did it just better than anyone. The Kisco album sucks. You know, they should have blown that thing up in Comiskey Park. But Queen was one of those bands that just would take an established paradigm that was still relatively new, and then just make it their own unique, awesome thing. And I think that really drove home through the movie how great the musicianship was to kind of navigate those bounds. And then I will go back to what Moko has said earlier. They shouldn't have ended on the full concert. It's pains me. I'm sorry. I should have slid this comment in earlier, but it pains me that I just kind of wanted to see more of after the concert, because they shifted things around. Freddie Mercury, they think was diagnosed in 86, 87. Live Aid came out in 85. And then he was with Hutton the whole time, which, by the way, I forgot about that dude. I straight up, when he knocked at the door, I was like, am I supposed to know him? Why is he important? Because he was such a tiny little insignificant earlier part of it. I would have loved to have seen a couple things from that show and then go back and dive into him dealing with AIDS, which is super, super dark. But it's something that they could have explored, because previously, you guys were right, he's such a quiet figure on his own life that for a lot of people, this would have been their first time to really see that play out. And they got all the guys on Queen as executive producers. Unlike the movie, Queen had about a 4-month break. It wasn't years. they literally released an album the year before Live Aid. They finished a huge world tour 4 months, and then they were still a very well established, well practiced band by the time they hit that mark. Which was, again, Brian, was it you who saying if you brought out the fact book, this thing would just fall apart by the
Oh yeah,
yeah. So that's one of the big ones. But like, you left this huge chunks. 6 years, right? He passed in 91.
Yeah, like if you like even pull up the music video for "These Are the Days of Our Lives" and just look at Freddie Mercury, and that's done in 1990. Yeah, you could definitely tell something's wrong. But it's interesting. Like, what's the story behind that? Like, how did he actually champion through that late stage in his illness and still make something that's beautiful and amazing?
Yeah,
I would love to see that story too.
And ultimately, like, every new song they introduced at Live Aid, I was like, oh, cool, I like this story. But this song's 4 minutes long, and that's just and it's getting pretty late in the movie. Like, I want to see more. One other thing, spitballing here, I would have loved to have seen a little bit more of the interaction with the other genres, because I kind of forgot that Queen crossed over with grunge. Like, for me, Queen is like the quintessential late 70s, early 80s band, but I don't really think of them as like being a year after the Beatles had their run, with Smile starting in 1970. And I also don't think of them as being a year away from Nevermind. Like, that's kind of incredible. And for a band that was so consciously aware of other music genres, that would have been a little more interesting to see that interaction, that headspace.
Yeah.
I could probably rant about the music for a while, but I think that's it.
Mocha, you got anything more about music?
No, I mean, I pretty much said all the pieces I had to say. My only other thing was just adding into what Blue and the rest of us were talking about regarding the end of the movie. I agree. I think there was a lot more to Freddie's life that would have made for good material beyond Live Aid. But instead, what we got was, Freddie's AIDS or his HIV being the point of tension leading up to the Live Aid concert, because he's got, I guess, what the movie depicts as AIDS throat, where he just like has a scratchy throat the entire time leading up to the concert. And then he gets to the concert, and it's sort of like a callback to his line from when he's in bed with Lucy early in the movie, where he says, when I'm on stage and I'm singing to that crowd, I couldn't sing off key if I tried. And so it just goes to show, oh yeah, despite the fact that he has, all this other shit going on, he's on stage, and that's where he's home, and so he's gonna like belt out his lyrics, and that's like a good uplifting moment. But again, there's more to that man beyond that, and so for me, it was really disappointing to watch again like that 15 to 20 minute long concert, and then have it end, and it just go like to black, and it says Freddie Mercury died from AIDS. Roll credits. Like, I wanted a bit more. So while the music itself was cool and it was great watching Rami Malek, do this one-to-one impression of his Live Aid performance, I wish we got a little bit more past that.
Sure. I mean, I can agree to disagree, but I would have liked to seen more after, but I don't know if I want to necessarily see. I know you said dealing with or living with having HIV and having AIDS. I'm always curious to see, because if they wanted to not probably kind of show that just as a respect for his life, maybe, I don't know, because if that was maybe like some dark times, but that's probably why they make movies, right? So we'll see. So let's get into our conclusion. So we definitely want to talk about a bit of a recap of the movie, of how you necessarily feel about it, but I'm also curious to hear everybody from either before or after you watch the movie, what is your favorite Queen song? I'm going to start it with Rylan.
Yeah, so I'll say this. I love Queen. I listen to Queen a lot. My favorite Queen album is Innuendo. It's one of those albums I would take on to a deserted island with, just because I love the story about it, and all the songs on there are amazing. But right now, my favorite Queen song is Princes of the Universe, because Highlander is a badass movie, and I watched it again recently.
Yes.
Nice.
But ultimately, for Bohemian Rhapsody, this movie definitely suffered through pretty much a decade's worth of production headaches and nightmares and everything. And I was surprised at how much I ultimately enjoyed what they put up on the screen. It definitely has its faults and everything. The plot is very simple and basic and to the numbers, but this performance of Rami Malek's plus just the music of Queen bring an emotional elevation to this film that makes it better than it should be, and I appreciate it for that. I definitely want this movie to be longer. I definitely wish they got to the 90s part of Freddie Mercury's life, but I still loved the reenactment of the Live Aid concert. I thought it's just a phenomenal undertaking, and it's amazing to put that on screen.
Mocha, what you got?
All right. Well, as far as favorite Queen songs goes, it's really hard to say. I mean, so much of what they've made are just like instant hits, and even the things that aren't common radio hits are still just amazing to listen to. I do, however, have a special place in my heart for "I Want to Break Free." I think it's just an awesome song. I love the 80s and 80s music, and that song as a whole has this very very nostalgic 80s sound to it with the simple synth and the approach to like the song construction in general, but also the music video is classic and great. And you need to be a badass rock band with a great legend. That legend needs to have a moment where they're bucked by mainstream society. And the fact that that video was banned from MTV because Freddie and the gang were dressed in drag, which is an awesome thing to even think of them doing at that point in time in history, is just badass, just pure like rock and roll badassery. So that song and that music video has a special place in my heart. As for my conclusion, I think that this film was beautifully shot, and I think from a cinematography standpoint, it was phenomenal, and I loved it. The acting was good too, but it did the incredibly difficult job of taking a story about one of the most dynamic and interesting musical figures in our generation and turned it into a fairly boring and kind of paint by numbers approach to his life. And that's going to stick with me no matter how much I enjoyed the other parts of the movie. As someone more eloquent than I put it, this felt less like a biopic of Freddie Mercury and more like an adaptation of his Wikipedia page. And that is unfortunate for me.
Yeah, I'd be curious even talking about that, Mocha. The one thing I thought about as this movie was ending and I was walking away, I'm like, if this is how they're going to make this movie off, like if this is how they make this sort of movie, I'm curious if once they do make another movie, and I'm sure they will, once they do make another movie of Michael Jackson and Prince, I'm curious to see how that movie is going to be. I know they already made probably one or two movies of Michael Jackson. I don't think they made a movie about Prince yet. But I'm curious about that. And I also know that there's a movie coming for Elton John. So I'm curious to see how that is going to be because that's already done. So I know that, looking at those three movies to be that's going to happen, I'm super curious how this sort of movie will affect anything else after it.
Yeah, interesting thing about the Elton John film, same studios doing it. And that director that finished up Bryan Singer's work, that's the movie he directed.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I wonder if he's gonna have a mid-movie like gay breakdown, and he's just surrounded in decadence. If it's just the same plot points, but just with
then they start playing "I'm Still Standing" and he just gets back up.
Also in 2020, they're gonna come out with a Liberace movie, and it's gonna be the same movie.
It's already out.
I fight for a world where people can have straight breakdowns. I fight for that world.
So to me, to echo those points, I think Rami Malek was amazing. I think that because it's always hard doing a movie that everyone knows the major hits from, no pun intended, because you have to hit them. You have to have the start of Queen. You have to have them be at their pinnacle and they're like most decadent. And then you have to have the slow decline and then the comeback for Live Aid, and then you have to have them die. Like that's everyone who is vaguely aware of Queen as a band knows those important hits. And it seemed like they kind of shoehorned it, like they wrote that out and then they just filled in the rest with like whatever they decided to do and basically in Queen songs. So I kind of feel bad because I think they handcuffed themselves with the source material. That being said, they could have gone a lot harder in certain aspects and given us a movie that we weren't expecting rather than a movie that was the easy way out. Yeah, my favorite song by Queen though is most definitely Fat Bottom Girls. I'm so glad that they had the one moment in the mansion when he smacks one of their behinds and then she rings the bell in response. And I was just like, all right, that I know it. That's gonna be my one Fat Bottom Girl reference, or Bicycle Race, whichever way you view it. Oh, that's what I was gonna say. Queen is I feel like they're the most universal band I've ever heard of, and it's very lucky that we got to see a movie which so many people could interact. Like these dudes, because they aforementioned spread almost 3 decades, well, 2 solid decades, they crossed through so many different boundaries of music, and they somehow inherited all of those boundaries, that doesn't matter what you listen to, you can find a Queen song that speaks to you. And it was nice to see how at least some of those, behind the silver curtain on some of those songs were created.
Yeah. Shout out to Miami Beach.
Yeah.
Well, so great. Dude, such a great actor. Yeah, so I'll wrap it up, and I would say, my favorite Queen song, I started with Another One Bites the Dust, because that was our senior song for some strange reason. I thought it was kind of weird, and I remember voting for Michael Jackson, but I got outvoted, whatever. But, Queen's still good. But I think after I saw, and I love Shaun of the Dead, Don't Stop Me Now, I think that was probably my favorite song by far. And then, looking at, like, I guess I was like also just reading through some of the lyrics, and I'm like, oh, this song is super simple, but I just love the fact that some of the words that he says in the song's phenomenal. So I added that to like my running playlist. I was like sprinting to it today. So that's definitely my favorite song right now for Queen. I definitely enjoyed this movie. I felt like it was kind of an ode, or sort of like a tribute to a lot of the songs, much like you were all talking about right now. I definitely did not go into this movie thinking that it was going to be any sort of acting that's going to be done with it. Obviously going into the movie, the only thing I've seen was the fact that Rami Malek, who was great in Mr. Robot, Brylan, you said that an hour ago. You shut your mouth.
It's horrible.
You shut your mouth. I think he was great in this film. I like the fact that it was a focus on other people, not just him. I was really concerned that we were only going to see him the entire time. But we definitely got a sense of other people and how everybody else necessarily feels either about him. Even the reporters kind of berating him about his sexuality and all these other questions, and how he was firing back and having like some honest sort of approach in that interview. So I thought that was really great. But I'm glad that, we definitely had a chance to kind of just live with these songs. We saw these songs almost kind of sort of come to life as it kind of felt with the people and band and what they were kind of going through. So definitely enjoyed it. Definitely enjoyed it a lot. I would definitely say it does not. I wouldn't mind it being a little bit longer, but without cutting some stuff in between, in the middle of it. So there could be some scenes and some weird takes that could have been gone. Especially, it felt like Paul was in this movie a lot, so maybe kind of trim that dude out a little bit. But yeah, that is going to be my take on Queen and Bohemian Rhapsody. And with that, we are the Down in Front Podcast. Thanks so much for a review of Bohemian Rhapsody. I'll toss it over to my best friend. And Brylan, where can people find more of your work?
Yeah, you can find me slapping the bass on Twitter at Brylan, Brilund. You can also find many movie and TV reviews on Instagram at I am Brylan. You can also find me as the host of the Gamescast, twitch.tv/Down in Front Podcast. We have started playing through Red Dead Redemption 2, and we are getting close to the end of Spider-Man as well. But also catch up on other things I'm going to do this week, where I'll be on Wicked Good Gaming's Not Another Gaming Podcast this week, so check them out too. They're a bunch of good guys.
But clearly this is the better podcast.
Superior podcast, yes.
Boom, you hear that, Dom? Mocha, what you got?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter trying to make frilled lizard neck vests a thing at Mocha Mike LI, as the Lord intended. Unfortunately, you cannot find me at Mocha Mike. The elderly man who owns that title is lost in a gay orgy somewhere, and I can't find him to get the name back. So have fun out there, buddy.
Mocha, you are trying your best to find him, though.
Oh, Lord knows it. Lord knows it. I'm coming for you.
Literally.
Aside from that, you can find me on Instagram at Mocha Mike, where I do a lot of my photography work, and on medium.com at Mocha Mike, where I post some longer form reviews of the things that we talk about here.
Cool. Shredder, Blue, what you got? What shows you got coming up?
Nothing. We should have a Halloween album out soon. Even though it's not Halloween, I kind of messed up and just forgot about it.
Second Halloween.
Halloween 2019 release, about a year early.
There
Yeah. You could find me also if you want to reach out directly to Jesse Rand's Lonely Lamp at ymail.com. Again, that is Jesse Rand's Lonely Lamp at ymail.com.
But when I get famous, I'm gonna buy you a house right next to me. It's gonna be great.
Just buy it next to Jesse Rand.
I will.
He needs another Lonely Lamp participant.
Well, he won't be lonely with me, so it'll be great. Check out more of our work at downinfrontpodcast.com. You can definitely find us anywhere and everywhere on the internet. Just type in downinfrontpodcast.com. For our Twitter, we at _DIFP. You can find us on Instagram at downinfrontpodcast.com, as well as Facebook as downinfrontpodcast.com. If you like what we do, you want to support us, you can definitely choose to become a patron. You're going to be getting early episodes and even bonus content. So we've been actually churning out some of these other bonus content materials, things like last calls and other sort of graphics that we've been kind of creating. So definitely check that out, downinfrontpodcast.com and patreon.com/downinfrontpodcast. Thanks so much for everybody for kind of hanging out with us. Our next review is Overlord. I don't know what that movie's about. I thought it was something to do with a video game. No?
Nope.
No? Okay.
Nope.
So that should be fun. I'm excited. You're excited. Drink some wine and have a good time. Goodbye. You guys like that, Ryan?